getting off the ground and soaring to new heights. A solar-powered electric plane, estimated to cost around $10 million, recently took off from an airport in Switzerland. Its pilot had his sights set on altitude. The highest a plane like this has ever flown was just under 30,300 feet. Raphael Domjean and his team wanted to break that record. There's a bit of strategy to altitude attempts with solar planes. Their batteries have to be charged before takeoff. They need to take advantage of rising thermal air currents to help them get to heights of around 14,000 feet, and then their batteries need to recharge. The AFP news agency reports that after their record attempt, they need to land with at least 16% left in their batteries, so they can't just glide back on zero power. Over the course of a flight that lasted 5 hours and 9 minutes, Domjean's team says he managed to climb to a height of over 31,200 feet, more than 900 feet higher than the previous record, something they called an unforgettable peak that defines great human and technological adventures. It is so good to see you this Monday. This is The World from A to Z, your nonpartisan recap of news and events taking place across the globe. And I'm Carl Azus, thrilled to have you watching as we return from a summer hiatus and kick off a new season, our third year on the year. We're headed to the U.S. Capitol for our next story. There's a significant meeting taking place there with the goal of ending the war in Ukraine. Since 2022, when the nation of Russia fully invaded its western neighbor, leaders around the world have pushed for an end to the fighting, which has claimed tens of thousands of lives in both Ukraine and Russia. On Friday, U.S. President Donald Trump met with Russian President Vladimir Putin. That took place in Alaska. Today, the American leader is set to host Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky at the White House, and they'll be joined by numerous European heads of state, from the leaders of Britain, France, and Germany to the heads of the European Commission and NATO. There are some major issues to be ironed out before a peace deal can be locked in. Russia wants control of certain eastern parts of Ukraine that are located near its border with Russia. Ukraine doesn't want to give up any territory, and it's been pushing for security guarantees, safeguards that would prevent Russia from invading ever again. That's something Russia has resisted in the past, but may be considering now. What these two warring sides are willing to give up, what the international community will support, what the next steps are toward getting lasting peace in the region, all of these topics are on the table for today's international meeting in Washington, D.C.
Word of knowledge. Which of these storms became the earliest Atlantic hurricane on record? Tropical Storm Anna, Hurricane Audrey, Labor Day Hurricane of 1935, Unnamed Storm of 1938. Though the Atlantic hurricane season officially runs from June the 1st to November 30th, an unnamed storm of 1938 formed in early January.
Over the weekend, a storm named Erin became the first hurricane of this year's Atlantic season. At one point, it was a ferocious Category 5 system, the strongest classification on the Saffir-Simpson hurricane wind scale. Erin's sustained wind speeds were 160 miles per hour. But by Sunday afternoon, the storm had been downgraded. It was still a powerful Category 3, but Erin's winds had eased to 125 miles per hour, and it wasn't expected to make a direct hit anywhere. Still, effects were felt across Puerto Rico, Hispaniola, the Turks and Caicos Islands, the Bahamas, and the U.S. and Canadian East Coasts were preparing for rough waters and dangerous rip currents as Hurricane Erin moves north over the Atlantic.
Atlantic hurricanes start over Africa's Sahara Desert. The sun beats down on the Sahara and warms up the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, disturbing the atmosphere over the Sahara. Westward winds move the unstable weather toward the coast, and as the sun continues to warm the earth, moisture rises up from the land, plants, and water into the air. As that warm, wet air rises, it cools down and creates condensation. Those are the tiny water droplets that make up storm clouds. A cluster of storms gather. Most storms die when they float over the cool coastal waters, but some are carried out into the warmer ocean, which causes them to grow. As the warm, wet air moves upward, it leaves behind an area of low pressure. cool air rushes in to fill that space, and that exchange of air is the wind that we feel during a storm. Now, don't forget that the Earth is rotating all the time. That makes the warm air spiral as it rises, and the cluster of storms begins to turn. As it turns, bands of wind and rain whip faster and faster. But at the center of the storm, called the eye, it's completely calm. Hurricanes do a lot of damage, but they also bring rain to dry areas and warm air to cooler places. Hurricanes also stir up the ocean, which balances the water temperature and brings nutrients up from the seafloor.
Is it constitutional? The 19th Amendment, which granted American women the right to vote, was ratified in 1919. True or false? This is false. Prohibition was ratified in 1919. Women's suffrage was granted the following year in 1920 after decades of campaigning by activists. On this date in world history, a discovery was made on this date in the 19th century that eventually gave rise to birthday party decorations. French astronomer Pierre Janssen first observed helium on August 18, 1868, though at the time he wasn't exactly sure what he was looking at. The second lightest element in the universe is also the second most common element in the universe, behind hydrogen, but helium is relatively rare on Earth. August 18, 1920 was when the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution was ratified. That granted women's suffrage, more colloquially known as the women's right to vote. The national movement to achieve this right, which involved activist Susan B. Anthony, had begun more than 70 years before the ratification. Time for our daily check-in with a few schools watching today. We want to welcome Mr. Che's class from Barstow Junior High School, where the Hawks are flying high over Barstow, California. You'll find Fort Huachuca in Arizona. That's where we heard from Mrs. Ward's class at Colonel Smith Middle School, home of the Panthers. And we'll make a stop in South Carolina to shout out the Bruins of Mr. Gandy's class. Thanks for watching from South Florence High School in Florence. Love that new animation.
Fuck Barrio Los Aztecas.